You think you're safe in your home. A simple sale, a new roommate, a cheap TV. Nothing could go wrong, right? But sometimes the quietest streets hide the darkest secrets. A knock at the door, a shadow in the window, a man watching, waiting, and doors that should stay locked, opening themselves in the dead of night. What starts as a harmless Craigslist deal can quickly turn into a nightmare you can't escape.
I was getting ready to move out of my house in a few months, so I started going through all the old things I had stored away in my garage. My goal was simple: separate what I needed from what I didn't. That's when I found my old motor tools. They were still in great condition: a high-quality power drill, a driver, and a full matching tool set. I had replaced them recently with newer battery-powered tools, so these had just been sitting there collecting dust. Instead of letting them go to waste, I decided to sell them. I took a few pictures and posted the tools on Craigslist, listing the entire set for $80. Considering they were still fully functional and barely used, it was honestly a great deal. It didn't take long for people to notice. Within an hour, I received 2 replies. The first person emailed asking if I would take $50 instead. I politely declined. The second message was different. The man said he was very interested and wanted to buy the tools that same evening for the full price. That sounded perfect to me. We agreed that he would come by at 5 p.m. to pick them up. Now, whenever I sold something online, I had a rule. I never let strangers inside my house. Instead, I always brought the item outside to the driveway. My street was in a busy neighborhood with constant traffic, so I felt safe doing transactions out in the open. That afternoon, I planned to stand outside a few minutes before 5 with the tools ready. But something happened earlier than I expected. At 4:30 p.m., there was a knock at my front door. When I looked through the window, I saw a red car parked in my driveway, and standing at my door was a man I had never seen before. Something about the way he stood there, completely still, immediately made me uneasy. I slowly opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man looked at me with a strange expression. "I'm here for the tools, the ones from Craigslist. I know I'm a little early." His voice was calm, but there was something cold about it, something that instantly made the atmosphere feel wrong. I told him he was a little early and asked if he could wait in his car for a few minutes while I gathered the tools. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. The silence between us suddenly felt uncomfortable, almost heavy. Then, without saying anything else, he slowly turned around and walked back toward his red car. I closed the door, locked it, and went to grab the tools from the garage. A strange feeling lingered in my mind, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just an awkward guy. Once I had everything ready, I carried the drill, the driver, and the tool set out to the top of my driveway. The man stepped out of his car and walked toward me. Up close, he looked even stranger. His face was emotionless, and he barely made eye contact. I pointed to the outlet on the side of the house. "You can test them if you want," I said. He plugged in the drill and pulled the trigger a few times. The motor hummed perfectly. Everything worked exactly the way it should. He nodded slightly, holding the drill in his hand. Then he looked at me and said something that immediately irritated me. "How about $20? I stared at him, thinking I had heard him wrong. "The deal was $80, I replied calmly. "I can go a little lower if you want, but 20 is way too low." After all, he had already agreed to pay the full price. But instead of responding, the man simply placed the drill back on the ground. He didn't even look at me. Without another word, he turned around, walked back to his car, got inside, and drove away. Just like that. I stood there in my driveway, completely confused. The whole thing felt strange, like I had just been part of some weird game. Frustrated, I picked up the tools and brought them back inside the house. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, it was just a waste of a few minutes. Or at least that's what I thought, because later that night, something happened that made me realize that man hadn't actually left. A couple of hours passed, and I tried to forget about the strange encounter. I was walking past the front window while making something to eat when something outside caught my attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a red car parked down the street. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly stepped closer to the window and looked more carefully. The car was parked about 3 houses away from mine. It looked exactly like the same red car from earlier. I stared at it for a moment, trying to see if anyone was inside, but the car appeared completely empty. No movement, no driver, just a silent car sitting in the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. After all, red cars weren't exactly rare. Still, the uneasy feeling from earlier returned. Another hour went by. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when suddenly, knock, knock, knock. Someone was at my front door. My entire body tensed up instantly. I stayed completely still, hoping whoever it was would simply go away. But about 30 seconds later, knock, knock, knock. The knocking came again, louder this time. Then a voice called out from the other side of the door. "Hey, it's me!" My stomach dropped. "I decided I'll take the tools," the man yelled. "I brought the money." Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. Suddenly, everything made sense. That red car I saw earlier, it wasn't a coincidence. He had been sitting there the entire time, watching my house, waiting. The realization sent a cold chill down my spine. I didn't respond. Instead, I quietly grabbed my phone and called the police, explaining what had happened and giving them the description of the man and his car. Outside, the man knocked a few more times. "I just want the tools," he shouted again. But I remained completely silent. After a few moments, everything went quiet. Too quiet. And that silence somehow felt even more terrifying. I was standing in my living room, staring at the front door while holding my phone tightly in my hand. The police had already told me they were on their way, but every second felt painfully slow. About a minute passed. I still didn't hear anything outside. The silence was unsettling, almost unnatural. Part of me wondered if the man had finally given up and left. Carefully, I began walking toward the window beside the front door. I moved slowly, trying not to make any noise. I just wanted to see if he was still there. But the moment I got close to the window, bang! Something slammed violently against the side of my house. The sudden noise made my heart jump into my throat. Right after the impact, I heard leaves rustling and rapid footsteps running across the yard. I quickly looked out the window, and that's when I saw him. The man was limping as he ran toward his red car, clearly struggling to move quickly. But before he could reach it, flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared at the end of the street. The police had arrived at the perfect moment. They stopped him halfway to the car. Later, after everything was over, the officers told me what had really happened. The man admitted that he had planned to rob me. But when I refused to let him inside the house earlier, his plan became more complicated. So he waited nearby, watching my house, trying to figure out another way in. Eventually, he attempted something desperate. On the side of my house, there was a large tree that grew close to the roof. He tried to climb the tree and jump onto my roof. From there, he planned to enter through the second-floor window. But when he jumped, he missed the roof. Instead, he slammed against the side of the house and injured his leg before falling to the ground. That loud noise I heard was him hitting the wall. The most disturbing part? When the police searched him, they found a knife. And when I checked the second-floor window he was aiming for, it was unlocked. If he had made that jump successfully, he would have been inside my house. The man later claimed it was only supposed to be a robbery. But honestly, I'll never know what his true intentions were. After that night, I completely stopped using Craigslist. And even today, I make sure every single window in my house is locked, even the ones that seem impossible to reach. Because sometimes, the things you think are unreachable are exactly what someone else is trying to reach.
Many years ago, I used Craigslist to search for a place to live. At the time, I was looking for a room to rent so I could split the cost with a roommate. Living alone was simply too expensive, and I didn't mind sharing a house if the person seemed normal. After about a week of searching through different listings, I finally found a place that seemed perfect. The rent was affordable, the house looked nice in the pictures, and the owner, who would also be my roommate, seemed friendly when we spoke on the phone. His name was Aaron. We talked several times before I agreed to move in. Every conversation made him seem like a completely normal guy. He was around my age, easy to talk to, and he explained everything about the house in detail. The more we talked, the more comfortable I felt about the situation. Everything seemed perfect. I didn't have many belongings, so packing was easy. I loaded everything I owned into the trunk of my car. A few days later, I drove about 30 minutes outside of town to my new home. But when I arrived, something immediately felt strange. The house was located in a quiet wooded area far from other homes. A long gravel driveway stretched from the road all the way to the house. As I slowly drove down the driveway, the trees around me seemed to grow thicker and darker. When the house finally came into view, it looked nothing like what I expected. It was a very old wooden house. The structure looked worn down and fragile, like it had been standing there for 100 years.
Aaron had mentioned that the house originally belonged to his parents, but seeing it in person made me realize just how old it actually was. For a moment, I hesitated, but then I remembered the photos I had seen online. The inside of the house looked completely modern, like it had been recently renovated. So I told myself the outside was probably just old, while the inside had been updated. Trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping into my mind, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. I knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. Aaron stood there smiling. "Hey, you made it," he said. At first glance, he looked exactly like the friendly guy I'd talked to on the phone. But as I stepped inside the house, I had no idea that something deeply disturbing was hidden there. Something Aaron was trying very hard to keep secret.
Inside, the house was almost shockingly different from the outside. The floors were clean and polished, the walls freshly painted, and the furniture seemed new and well kept. The renovations were impressive, and for a moment, I almost forgot how creepy the exterior had looked. I moved my few belongings into the house that night, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. Aaron worked in town most days, leaving me mostly alone in the house, which felt peaceful, but also a little eerie given its isolation. There was, however, one locked door that caught my attention. Aaron never mentioned it. It was off a hallway I passed every day, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, my curiosity gnawed at me. I assumed it led to the basement, even though Aaron had told me the house was just a single story. A few nights later, I began to notice something unsettling. Aaron had a strange routine. Each night after I went to bed, I would hear his bedroom door open. Footsteps would creep down the hallway, slow and deliberate. Then I'd hear the soft thump of a door, as if he were pressing up against it. He didn't enter my room, but he would linger nearby for a few moments, then retreat down the hall and into the locked room. At first, I tried to convince myself it was harmless. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe it was just a quirk. But as the nights went on, the behavior continued. Every night, same time, same routine. Open bedroom door, pause at my room, walk to the locked door, enter, never sleep in his own room. Something about the way he moved, silent, careful, like he was hiding something, made my stomach churn. The house, which had felt warm and welcoming at first, now seemed suffocating. Shadows lingered in corners that never existed before. The walls seemed to watch me, and that locked door, it became the focal point of my fear. After a few nights of this strange routine, I couldn't take it any longer. One night, I decided I had to find out what was behind that locked door. I lay in bed, listening closely. As usual, around the same time, Aaron's bedroom door creaked open. I held my breath. Footsteps moved slowly down the hallway. He paused near my room, then continued to the locked door. I waited until I heard the click of the lock and the door slowly opening. My heart was pounding, my hands trembled. I slipped out of bed and quietly crept into the hallway. There he was, standing inside the open doorway. When he noticed me, his eyes widened in shock, almost like he had been caught in a terrible secret. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound calm,
though my voice shook. He didn't answer. He just stared. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "Why do you keep going to this door every night?" I asked again, stepping closer. For a brief moment, everything froze. The only sounds were our breathing and the distant wind outside. Then, without warning, Aaron bolted. He ran around the corner toward the back door, yanked it open, and disappeared into the darkness of the woods behind the house. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. The locked door now stood open, revealing a basement. It was nothing like the renovated house above. The air smelled of damp decay. The walls were rotten, dark, and splintered. No light switches, just pitch-black darkness that seemed to swallow the hall. I wanted to go down. My curiosity screamed at me, but my fear was stronger. I backed away, ran to my room, packed what I could, and left. I never looked back. Aaron vanished that night, and I never heard from him again.
Years later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to look up the house online, trying to make sense of what had happened that night. What I found shocked me. The house had been torn down just months after I left. An article mentioned it had been abandoned due to criminal findings, though it didn't go into detail. That meant one thing. When Aaron ran away that night, he never returned. The basement, the strange nightly routine, whatever secrets he had been hiding, I would never know. The house, once standing silently in the woods, was now gone, but the memory of that night stayed with me. I realized that sometimes the quietest, most unassuming places can hide the darkest secrets. Even today, whenever I think of that old wooden house, I feel a chill crawl up my spine, reminding me that curiosity can sometimes lead you too close to danger. A few years ago, I had just signed the lease for a small rental house. I hadn't lived in a house much before. I had spent years in apartments, and my space was barely furnished. I had a decent couch and a TV stand, but the living room felt empty. I wanted bigger TV to fill the space, but I didn't have much money. So, naturally, I turned to Craigslist. After scrolling through dozens of listings, I finally found a TV that seemed to fit my needs. It was old and bulky, probably 10 years outdated, but for me, it was perfect. It was cheap, big, and supposedly in working condition. I emailed the seller and got a quick response the next morning. The man introduced himself as Mitch. He seemed eager to show me the TV, almost overly excited, which made me a little uneasy. He suggested I could come by 6:30 p.m. that evening. He even sent a Google Calendar invite labeled Craigslist TV. Despite the oddities, I decided to go. That evening, I drove my truck to his address. By the time I arrived, it was already dark. All the lights in the house were on. I checked my cash one last time and walked up to the front door. The door was slightly open. There was no screen or security door, just the main door. Thinking it was left open for me, I leaned over and peeked inside. No one was there. I hesitated for a moment, a creeping unease settling in my chest. Then I rang the doorbell. The moment the doorbell rang,
I heard something drop somewhere deep inside the house. The sound echoed through the quiet rooms, and then silence. A shiver ran down my spine. Something about the noise felt wrong, heavy, unnatural. I considered leaving immediately. My instincts screamed at me, "Get out now!" But before I could move, I heard footsteps approaching from behind the door. The door opened slightly wider, revealing a large, middle-aged man. "Need something?" he said, half his body still hidden behind the door. I forced my voice to stay steady. Yeah, I'm here for the TV. We scheduled for 6:30? He looked at me strangely, like I had interrupted something important. After a tense pause, he opened the door completely and stepped aside. At that moment, I knew something was off. The man wasn't acting like the cheerful Mitch from the emails. He was gruff, imposing, and almost angry. But by the time I realized it, I was already inside. The TV was right next to the door, so I didn't have to go far. Yeah, this looks good. I'll take it," I said quickly, holding out the cash. Before I even knew what was happening, the man snatched the money from my hand, shoved it in his pocket, and pushed me toward the door. "Leave," he barked. I didn't argue. I sprinted out, jumped in my truck, and drove away as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, my heart raced. I could barely comprehend what had just happened. It was only a few minutes later, when I pulled over and called the police, that the full story started to unfold. When the police arrived and investigated, the truth was far stranger than I could have imagined. The man who had confronted me was not Mitch. Mitch, the real homeowner and seller, had been assaulted in his own kitchen just minutes before I arrived. The man I met at the door was actually another Craigslist buyer who had shown up to steal from Mitch while Mitch was distracted with another sale. Mitch had innocently sent the Google Calendar invite for the TV, and the thief had accepted it, unknowingly revealing his full name and email in the process. It all became clearer when the police traced him. The thief had planned the robbery carefully, choosing a time when Mitch would be vulnerable. He beat Mitch, stole money, and prepared to leave. When I arrived, I unknowingly walked into the aftermath of the crime. The man at the door, gruff, angry, and dangerous, was still armed with intent, which is why he pushed me out so aggressively. The police caught him within a few days, thanks to the digital footprint left behind by the calendar invite. Finally, I got to meet the real Mitch, who, despite being attacked, was a kind, friendly man, completely different from the thief I had encountered. The whole experience left me shaken. Craigslist had suddenly felt far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. After the thief was caught, I finally understood the terrifying reality of that night. Mitch had been attacked in his own home, and I had unknowingly arrived in the middle of it. The man who confronted me at the door had planned the robbery meticulously, and my life could have been in danger if he had been more impulsive. It was strange to think how a simple Craigslist transaction could turn into something so dark and violent. The digital footprint, the Google Calendar invite, had been the key to catching the criminal, showing just how careful criminals can be and how small mistakes can reveal everything. Even now, I think back to that night, the quiet street, the lights in the house, the sudden slam of the door, and the way the man's eyes seemed to pierce right through me. It left a mark, a chilling reminder that ordinary situations can quickly become nightmarish. From that day on,
I became extremely cautious with online transactions. I never went alone to pick up items at strangers' homes. I always trusted my instincts and stayed alert, knowing that danger can appear in the most unsuspecting forms. And sometimes, even when everything seems safe, there are hidden dangers lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. The Craigslist TV incident taught me that lesson better than anything else ever could. Some experiences are scary, not because of what happens to you, but because of what could have happened.